We are here today to look at the 2021 entrant to Kawasaki's Z range, the ZH2 SE. Some of you may have already seen that earlier in the year we tested the Kawasaki ZH2, a natty little black number, and what a bike it was. Superchargers on the road, love them, let's have more of them. However, Kawasaki have got a bit of a boner these days for SE editions, and so they released this, the SE version of the H2. So what are the differences? Essentially two things, well, three things, but yeah. Suspension, it has the Showa electronic suspension on board, and they've changed the brakes, which isn't a bad idea with 180 odd horsepower, to the Brembo Dilema calipers. So that is top spec suspension, top spec calipers. It can only make the bike better, can't it? For here and now, we are actually going to concentrate mostly on what differences the kit makes to the bike, because the H2 SE is pretty much the same as the H2. The only difference is the boingy bits and the stoppy bits. If you want to know more about all the rest of the H2, go back and watch that video. Or if you're lazy, how about a really quick wrap up? Right. Real simple, standard ZH2, batshit crazy, unbelievably good fun, really usable on the road, 240 kilograms, super heavy, really a road bike, not really a track bike. They are so difficult to ride really fast. The best way really to ride an H2 fast and excitingly is kind of sweeping, whoosh, whoosh, woo, whoosh, that kind of thing. That is where it really is in its element. Where things got really, really hard for your kind of normal folks is if you try and ride it real hard, like you stole it. You need some serious skills to be able to do that. So that's why I'm really excited to see if the electronic suspension here makes that difference. Can you really ride this hard and fast as you want? So let's find out. Let's look at the suspension first. A few years ago, actually here at Castle Combe, I rode on Öhlins 2.0 electronic suspension on the then new Ducati Panigale, and I thought, wow, I think I actually prefer this to normal suspension. But then, just a few weeks later, on Bike World, I rode the new Kawasaki ZX10 SE, and that had Showa's version, and that absolutely blew my mind. From a technical standpoint, it was actually more sophisticated than the Öhlins, and it really showed. Now, the suspension on this bike is, as far as I can gather, as close as, damn it, to that's the same suspension that was on the ZX10. 500 times a second this thing can adjust. 500 times a second, so it's just done it 500 times. That's how quickly it can read and adjust to give you the smoothest ride possible. That's whether you're in road, normal, or sport mode, and all three do make a real difference. So for example, the roads around where I live on are quite bumpy, so I like to have the power full, traction control low, but I suspect the suspension in the middle, and oh my god, it is absolutely beautiful. The way these things smooth out bumps is incredible. I wasn't sure just how much of a jump up it would be over the standard Showa BPF suspension on the stock H2, but it is. It's a mile beyond it. It really is fabulous. There are a few things worth thinking about. This is a heavy bike. It's 240 odd kilograms fully loaded, and stiff suspension on heavy bikes doesn't tend to kind of work that well. For starters, it pushes the tires a bit more. It makes it harder to turn, and one of these big things, the turning is kind of okay on these, but the stiffer you have the suspension, it's a little harder to turn. The beauty is, if you wanted to run the stiff suspension, they have like a base setting, so you go from the base setting and then you can go in and tweak and twiddle if you know what you're doing. It's basically like your kind of more traditional suspension, except you do it over your phone. Now that might not be such a surprise. You think, well, this is like £3,000 more than the standard bike. It's got to be better than it, right? And yeah, it is. In fact, I would say if there's any standout from the front and rear that's better than the standard bike. The rear is just a little bit more sophisticated. That being said, I didn't have a huge amount of problems with the standard suspension on the other H2 either, but both have their place. And it's just a simple fact, I would say, if you can afford the SE, well, plump in that direction. And the brakes are marvellous. I mean, you put Brembo's best on a bike, they're not going to be shite, are they? Now, obviously, you might be sitting there going, well, the bike is £3 more expensive than the standard one. Of course it's going to be better. And you'd be right, but sometimes better isn't always better in the way that you seem. For example, another reason I have this bike set on normal with the suspension settings is with this kind of weight, I like there to be some weight transfer. It makes me feel better. It's as though I can feel the wheels better. And with the suspension stiff on this, I don't like it as much unless I'm, say, on a track. And the standard H2 has really lovely weight transfer front and rear. So in many ways, what I'm doing is I'm emulating that bike on this bike. The difference is the way this smooths out bumps. It can just take care of tiny little discrepancies in corner entry and stuff. And that is the real difference. The brakes are an upgrade. However, there is an issue, but it's not a Kawasaki ZH2 issue. It's an ABS issue. It's the same with pretty much every bike I've ridden, bar the absolute top spec ones. ABS works great when you hammer it on, straight line. Oh, I need to stop in a hurry. It stops. Perfect, great. The problem with ABS for me is when you're kind of in that 3/4 strength braking. You know, you've seen you need to brake for something. It's not a total emergency, and you figure out I can pull the lever this much and I'll stop there. But for some bizarre reason, on most modern bikes, when you do that 3/4, it seems to just release more, and you end up going 10 yards further than you planned to. And that's an issue that reared its head 10 years ago. It's still here. It's not gone away. It's not the Kawasaki's fault. It's just an ABS thing and a general gripe of mine, but it's on this bike, so it has to be said. That aside, when the ABS doesn't have to kick in, the power is wonderful, the progression is wonderful, the feel at the lever, everything is great, and it does work really well in tandem with the electronic fork. As you pull the brake and as it dives, you can sometimes feel some kind of stuff going on up front. It's really cool. So really, as a model in and itself, that is pretty much it. As I said, you go back, you watch the other video, you get all the other H2 information you need, and this is just the extras on here. Is there anything bad about this bike? Well, I tell you what, we're having to pull some. It's tough being critical of bikes these days. So, for example, I'm 6'2", and I was having so much fun on the last H2 that I didn't actually notice this. But when I'm riding along normally, like this, I can't see anything. I have to actually pull my head down to see how fast I'm going. So if you're 6'2", be aware you have to put your head down to look at it. This is a special edition, and H2s are really known for that beautiful silver paint, right? Well, this bike only has one panel in that, which is the intake for the supercharger. And I think, bearing in mind you can actually have the stock one completely covered in this awesome shininess, why isn't there more on the special edition? It's a special edition. Make it extra special. You may have noticed we're at Castle Combe. Luckily for us, we were able to actually have the fun, because the one thing I worried about was it's a big bike, it's touring tyres, it's still huge amounts of, it's 180 horsepower, 140 newton meters of torque, and it's not insured. So what if something happened? But luckily, our friends at BeMoto came to the rescue, and they do track day insurance for your bike. So we went to them and we worked out a lovely little deal, just like you can. And so I could actually go out here and not have to worry about paying Kawasaki a massive bill afterwards if anything went wrong, which it didn't. So it's been a fun day, and I've enjoyed my few weeks that I've actually had on this bike. I mean, you might have noticed from both our videos that I tested it on the same roads. I basically did the same things I did on the standard one, so I could get, you know, the best kind of comparison between the two. But thanks to the amazing Gruffalo behind the camera, it is going to get even better, because this is going to be my long-term bike for a few months, as of now. And boy, what do I want to do? Right, we've got a supercharged engine, so we need some more power, right? Oh, absolutely. But what I would quite like to do is also make it lighter. I want to knock off some of those 240 kilograms. So I might look at wheels and bits and bobs, but I'm going to also try and do it cheaply to start with. Try and see what kind of gains we can get for cheap prices, and then we'll start looking at the more expensive stuff afterwards. So there you have it. There we go. Kawasaki ZH2 SE, unsurprisingly, absolutely brilliant. Road bike, really, not really a track bike, but hilarious. So much power, so much fun, brilliant up and down shifter, brakes are great. I'll be honest with you, I am, it's been a couple of weeks and I'm very much falling for it already. Plus the fact that, because it is so cuckoo, I do take it easy on this sometimes, which if I was on another Sporty Naked, I would probably still be riding like a tit. So there is that to think about. This bike makes you think, and that's got to be a good thing. Excitement and thought and lots of green. Colour me happy.